Girls' bottoms are a major problem, according to several media stories this year. Specifically, girls are revealing too much of their behinds, and their wanton disregard for modesty not only puts them at risk of catching a chill during winter, but of luring pedophiles, sex offenders, and garden variety guys who are only after one thing out of hiding. The first example of such a story, called Girls on Show, appeared on A Current Affair at the end of July. As this screen capture shows, the camera work in this tirade against girls wearing skimpy clothing when nightclubbing lingered fetishistically over the girls' legs and bottoms, many of which were only barely covered by miniskirts and hot pants. Celebrity women Ida Buttrose and Charlotte Dawson offered comment on the girls' dress, making some telling observations that likened them to hookers, tarts, and prostitutes. Dawson, for instance, said, "The girls actually selling themselves on the street are much more tastefully dressed than some of these young ladies," while Buttrose explained that provocative dressing was not likely to attract a potential husband. Wait, they might flirt with a tart, they might have sex with a tart, but it's often not the tart that they take home to meet their mother. This story is not unusual. The language of sex work is frequently applied to what girls and young women are wearing today. In the UK, Joanna Lumley also recently expressed dismay at young women dressing like lap dancers. The most notable recent Australian example was the online following that developed around a mother's complaints about Target's clothing range for girls. Anna Amini wrote on the retailer's Facebook page, "Dear Target, could you possibly make a range of clothing for girls 7 to 14 years that doesn't make them look like tramps? You have lost me as a customer when buying apparel for my daughter, as I don't want her thinking shorts up her backside are the norm or fashionable." These leopard print numbers, as well as a pair of denim cut-off shorts, were the most common images circulated as evidence of Target's inappropriately sexual or trampy clothing range for girls. This focus on how much flesh both preteen girls and young women are exposing is understandable in a culture where sexy images of women are visible on every magazine stand, on many billboards, on the sides of buses and trams, and in popular TV and film. We are ultimately very uncomfortable when the ideal sexy woman crosses paths with the developing girl. Just where is the border between sexual innocence and knowing construction of a sexy appearance? This is a particularly thorny question in a culture where fashion models, the ideal representation of how a woman should look, and the young women who feature in pornography are often teenagers. The use of 10-year-old model Thelene Blondeau in Paris Vogue posed and dressed as a woman threw some into despair at the crossing of this line, but also highlighted the systematic use of girls as young as 13 as models for women's clothing and cosmetics. Where the boundary between girl and sexual woman lies is also problematic when we attempt to divorce activities such as pole dancing from their adult connotations. In Canada, the Twisted Grip pole dance studio attracted international media attention in the past month for their Little Spinners pole dance classes for girls. Now, these classes were supposedly created in response to requests from mothers who had their own poles at home and wanted their daughters to be able to learn to perform on the pole safely. The studio emphasised that the classes were about fitness and athleticism and contained no sexual moves. But I think you can see from the logo of the studio, which shows a woman in her underwear or a bikini with her legs spread upside down on the pole, for most people commenting online, it was impossible to divorce this from any kind of sexual association, especially when we were thinking about girls as young as 5 taking these classes. To go to a strange source, the awkward tension between what is seen as desirable in women and parental and social expectations of girlhood innocence are aptly summed up by a routine from comedian Chris Rock. He occasionally jokes about visiting strip clubs himself, but he had a new perspective on the adult industry when his baby girl was born. He comments about gazing down on his daughter in her pram. "My only job in life is to keep her off the pole. Keep my baby off the pole. I mean, they don't grade fathers, but if your daughter is a stripper, you fucked up. So, as a society, we seem to want women to be sexually ready and available, but we don't want our own daughters launching a career in porn films or taking up a slot at Spearmint Rhino. No wonder the situation is confusing for girls. The contemporary media landscape condemns them for being too sexual, for wearing revealing clothing and intentionally seeking attention from men. It also manifests worries about younger girls, such as tweens in target clothing, who might unintentionally convey sexual readiness, although I'm careful to caution that what girls or women wear provides no justification for any kind of sexual assault. While much of this debate seems new, born out of a hypersexualised, internet-enabled culture, I want to show that similar anxieties about girls' sexuality were also prominent in the media in the Victorian period in Britain. What I would argue is that these concerns about the transition from girl to woman in regard to sex are quite consistent across the past century and a half. But while the messages that we're giving directly to girls are similar, the key difference is that sexual images of women surround us where they were once concealed from girls. The messages about sex that we now provide to girls are more contradictory than ever, as they are branded tarts and hookers for dressing in a way that reveals their bodies, but are immersed in a popular culture that presents being sexy and sexually available as the foremost qualities of the ideal woman. So the Victorian period spans the reign of Queen Victoria from 1837 to 1901, and it's a crucial era for thinking about girlhood and how it's been shaped, because it then began to be considered as a distinct stage, something separate from childhood and womanhood. Being a girl meant being in a state of transition. Girls also began to be more universally educated later in the century, so girls' books and magazines became publishing phenomena, and they were looking to read stories and articles aimed at their interests, while publishers and editors sought to direct girls in the right ways to behave, read, exercise, and fulfil their family duty. The most popular of these magazines from 1880 was the Girl's Own Paper, which more than 100,000 girls aged from 12 to 24 read each week. Its resident doctor, Medicus, a pseudonym for Gordon Stables, a former army doctor, regularly wrote on the topics of beauty and clothing, especially corsets, as they related to health. So yes, from the military to girls' bedrooms. Like most commentators of the era, Medicus thought that being healthy was the route to being beautiful, and that cosmetics had negative moral connotations for girls. In 1888, he wrote a column on beauty, and he said the following: "Well, I declare to you that when I see young ladies rouged, powdered, and pencilled, I wonder if the world is getting worse. For deceit thus carried about openly can have no good effects on the moral character. Many girls moving in what is called good society are little better than walking frauds, perambulating fibs." This view in a girls' magazine, which is fairly typical, mirrors a controversy provoked 20 years earlier in March 1868. Journalist Eliza Lynn Linton published an anonymous article in the Saturday Review called "The Girl of the Period" that caused a stir in other papers. Fascinatingly, I think, the Girl of the Period has major parallels with the current affair Girls on Show story I mentioned earlier, and I'll point these out in a moment. Amid a broader tirade against feminism, Linton expressed disgust in girls who are using clothing, such as tight skirts, as well as cosmetics, to emphasise their sexual beauty and to attract men. "The girl of the period," she wrote, "is a creature who dyes her hair and paints her face, a creature whose sole idea of life is fun, and whose dress is the chief object of such thought and intellect as she possesses. No matter if, in the time of crinolines, she sacrifices decency, in the time of trains, cleanliness, in the time of tied-back skirts, modesty. No matter either if she makes herself a nuisance and an inconvenience to everyone she meets. The girl of the period has done away with such moral muffishness as consideration for others or regard for counsel or rebuke. It was all very well in old-fashioned times when fathers and mothers had some authority and were treated with respect, to be tutored and made to obey. But she is far too fast and flourishing to be stopped in mid-career by these slow old morals." Where the modern girl was going wrong, according to Linton, was in her similar aims and feelings to women of the demi-monde, effectively mistresses kept by wealthy lovers. So here is our precedent, 140 years ago, for comparing fashionable girls in the pursuit of fun and entertainment to prostitutes. The girl of the period also connects with that idea that Ida Buttrose presented about sexy girls not making for good wives, but only being good for a one-night stand. Linton proposed that the girl of the period does not marry easily. Men may amuse themselves with her for an evening, but they do not readily take her for life. And let's not forget the resonance of timeless complaints about girls no longer listening to the advice of their parents about modesty. The uproar that Linton provoked about the girl of the period spawned a short-lived magazine edited by men called The Girl of the Period Miscellany in 1869 that satirised these fashions for young women that attracted this controversy. This caricature of the fast-smoking girl describes her desire for a frivolous existence at dances and concerts while wearing the latest clothes and doing a mild weed on the quiet, as smoking is referred to. Crucially, this new type of girl, who followed aesthetic pleasure, didn't see herself as one day taking up a subordinate domestic role, but rather in this poem wants to hook a rich, stupid old husband who will be the one who shall obey her. Linton's views about girls were widely criticised. This cartoon from the paper The Tomahawk, for instance, ascribes a degree of jealousy and transgression to her. Hers was by no means a consensus opinion. Indeed, when reflecting on the Victorian period, while girls were certainly eager to be modern compared to those who came before them by attaining things like higher education or pursuing employment, there was no major apparent transformation in morality. Most girls conformed to family and church expectations. In other words, there was no actual crisis of prostitute-like girls in Britain, but only a perception brought about by the observation of a minority or of speculation about morality based on changing fashions and transforming social norms. The teenage girls condemned for wearing revealing clothing today reflect a long history of young women dressing fashionably and sometimes provocatively to the alarm of adults. So if girls have been criticised for wearing makeup and inappropriate clothing because of their sexual connotations for at least 150 years, why are we seeing such a particular anxiety about this topic at the present moment? And why are younger girls coming under sexual scrutiny? Why does a discussion of short shorts for girls even lead to questions of whether they might attract pedophiles? My answer is that the culture around girls has changed. While today's girl and the Victorian girl have been exposed to the same encouragements to avoid wearing makeup or revealing clothing, the Victorian girl was almost entirely shielded from sexual images of women. Advertising would not even depict a line illustration of a woman wearing a corset, an item of underwear, until the 1880s or 1890s. While erotic images did circulate among men, they were too risque and marginalised to influence mainstream popular culture significantly. The first erotic films were not produced until around 1896, and even then, the gyrating hips of a belly dancer or a quite platonic kiss were regarded as scandalous and worthy of censorship. And this slide shows a still of a kinetoscope of Fatima's Hoochie Coochie dance from 1896 as shot by Thomas Edison. And though she is fully clothed, Fatima's swivelling hips and chest are intentionally covered by a white picket fence because it's a bit too arousing. In her book, Promiscuities, A Secret History of Female Desire, Naomi Wolf suggests that girls become women through the work of two kinds of pressure. The external, what their culture tells them it means to be an adult sexual female, and the internal, the development of sexual desire itself. If we accept that not much has changed in girls' internal development across more than a century, apart from the earlier onset of sexual maturation, then we ought to focus on what has changed in the culture that surrounds them. We continue to insist on girls remaining sexually innocent through criticism of girls who wear revealing clothing, shaming of teen mothers, and sexually active girls as sluts. But we conflictingly surround girls with messages that suggest being an adult sexual female means being on constant sexual display, being sexually available and compliant, and putting personal sexual fulfillment and comfort second to meeting a porn-influenced ideal. These are the messages embedded in music video clips, when women are often gyrating in lingerie without Fatima's white picket fence to shield them. In film and television, where fictional worlds are largely populated by women who are young and attractive and may have had surgical enhancement to increase their bust size or plump their lips. In advertising, where women's sex appeal is used to sell everything from clothing to ice cream, and in which topless pole dancing mothers who have money shoved down their G-strings by men, as in the infamous Nando's Chicken TV advertisement, are deemed by the Advertising Standards Board as, quote, not incompatible with family values, and by the company itself as a forthright display of empowerment. In magazines, where female perfection comes courtesy of Photoshop, and most pervasively on the internet, where millions of images and videos of women, pornographic images, are accessible to anyone, including children. Even online criticism of our nation's first female leader often contains jokes about her sexual prowess and attractiveness. According to this logic, there is not a sphere of life where being sexy is not the ultimate achievement of a woman, nor a place where how she looks is not the most important thing about her. The past century has thankfully seen positive developments in how women's sexuality is regarded and understood. We have learned to acknowledge and accept that women feel sexual desire too, in a way that has made for more enlightened attitudes to sex. Yet, when it comes to girls, the fallout from the sexual revolution has merely left them caught between competing ideals. Our thinking about girls and sex is not as progressive as we'd like to believe. As I've suggested, a number of the major criticisms levelled at girls are reminiscent of those expressed about girls in the Victorian era. Though it is now usual for girls to form sexual relationships outside of marriage, our expectations of girlhood's sexual innocence still share some of the same ideas at the core about sexual display being akin to prostitution and demure girls making good wives. However, the culture surrounding girls could not be more different. Victorian girls received a consistent message that virtue was of supreme importance, and the stories and articles they read, as well as the advertisements they saw, reinforced this idea and used morally restrained women as exemplars. Today's girls are being held to account to ideals of sexual innocence while immersed in a culture of examples of adult women who are admired because they are sexy. While there is nothing wrong with girls developing healthy sexual lives and a sense of their own attractiveness, contemporary media and popular culture creates a fraught environment in which they might do so. Being sexy is sold as a path to empowerment, but one that only hookers and tramps choose to take. For as long as we are showing girls that the most important thing about women is their sex appeal, we shouldn't shame them if they try to emulate what our culture tells them is most valuable.